Okay, so let's dive into this.
All right.
You sent over some really interesting stuff about using nicotine patches for weight loss.
Interesting.
And we've got like articles and even some discussions about dosages and stuff like that. So it sounds like you're kind of curious about whether this like off-label use actually works and what the science says about it.
Yeah.
So our goal in this deep dive is to really pull out the key things from these sources.
Okay.
And understand like, what are the potential benefits and drawbacks, and answer some of those like burning questions you might have, like, can you smoke while wearing a patch?
Right.
Spoiler alert.
No. Oh, we got to dive into that one.
Yeah, exactly.
To figure out why.
Yeah. So to help us kind of make sense of all of this, we have our expert here
Hello.
to guide us. So
Yeah.
jumping right in,
Yeah, let's jump in.
the basic idea is that nicotine delivered through a patch might help people lose weight,
Okay.
but kind of tackling it from a couple different angles.
Okay.
So the sources highlight appetite suppression. Like, it seems like nicotine can influence those hunger hormones, like ghrelin, which basically tells your brain, hey, it's time to eat.
You're hungry.
Yeah, you're hungry.
Right.
So maybe nicotine can make you feel less hungry.
Interesting.
The other main point is a possible boost to your metabolism by, like, encouraging the release of adrenaline.
Okay.
And interestingly, the sources also suggest it might reduce cravings for those high-calorie treats.
Wow. So it kind of hits it from all angles.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it seems like it.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
That it's not just like one, switch that it flips, but it's like a multifaceted approach.
Yeah, it's like kind of like
to weight loss.
affecting all these different things.
Yeah, different systems within your body that are kind of all contributing to, how hungry you feel or how your body uses energy.
Right.
And this ghrelin thing is pretty interesting because that's like,
It's like a root cause almost.
a very like root level driver of hunger.
Yeah.
So if you can target that, that's
Powerful.
potentially pretty powerful
Yeah.
if it works,
Right.
which is of course a big question.
Right, exactly.
We'll have to see what the research says.
Yeah. And one really important point that the material makes is that using a patch avoids all that like really harmful stuff
Okay.
that comes with smoking.
Yeah.
Like tar and carbon monoxide.
Right.
Which is a huge difference when you're thinking about this for like, managing weight.
Absolutely. I think that's really important to highlight. If we kind of zoom out and look at it from a public health perspective, it's essential to make that distinction between, the effects of nicotine in isolation
Right.
versus all the, thousands of toxic chemicals that you would get in cigarette smoke.
Right.
So the patch is, sort of providing a way to deliver nicotine without all of those other harmful compounds.
Right. And so if this was something that you were like considering in the sources, lay out a general approach. They suggest starting with a lower dose patch.
Right.
Maybe around 7 to 14 milligrams, just to see how your body responds.
Okay.
And then the material says potentially increasing it to 21 milligrams if needed.
Okay.
So you kind of start low and see how you feel.
Right.
And it seems like consistency is really important.
Yeah.
Recommendations say to wear the patch for like a good chunk of the day, like 16 to 24 hours to get those consistent effects.
Got it.
And, this won't surprise you, but the sources emphasize this isn't some kind of magic bullet.
Right.
Combining it with a healthy diet and exercise is super important for the best results.
Of course. Yeah, makes sense.
And a big one is you should talk to your doctor before even thinking about trying this.
Yeah, I think that that's really important to emphasize that, there's individual variability in how people respond to things.
Right.
So, what works for one person in terms of dosage or how long to wear the patch for might not be right for another person.
Right.
So that kind of start low and go slow approach. And getting advice from a healthcare professional is definitely the safest way to think about something like this.
For sure. And speaking of important safety information,
Yeah.
one of the most direct questions you're probably wondering is, can you actually smoke cigarettes while you're wearing a nicotine patch?
Right.
And the answer from the sources is a hard no.
Hard no.
They say that doing that could lead to a nicotine overdose.
Oh, wow.
Which can cause some really unpleasant and even dangerous side effects.
Yeah.
Like nausea,
Yeah.
dizziness,
Ooh.
increased heart rate, and high blood pressure.
Wow.
And that's because the patch is designed to give you a certain level of nicotine.
Yeah.
And then if you add cigarettes on top of that,
Yeah, you're getting way too much.
way too much. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really critical safety message. I think the sources are very clear on that one
Yeah.
about the potential for some serious problems if you were to mix those.
Right.
It's really about understanding the total amount of nicotine your body's getting
Yes.
from different sources.
Yeah. So the 21 milligram patch gets specifically mentioned in the materials.
Okay.
This is typically for like people who are heavy smokers.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also sometimes considered for weight loss because it might be stronger at suppressing appetite.
Okay.
However, the sources reiterate that if you're new to this, starting with a lower dose is definitely the way to go
Yeah.
to minimize potential side effects.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the thinking is, with the higher dose for weight loss,
Yeah.
that you're trying to kind of maximize that appetite suppression effect.
Right.
But you really have to weigh that against the risks,
Yeah.
especially if you're not used to having higher levels of nicotine in your system.
Right, and this is interesting. The name Dr. Brian Ardis comes up in the context of nicotine dosage for weight loss.
Okay.
And the sources mentioned his protocol involves starting even lower,
Okay.
like with a 3.5 milligram patch,
Okay.
and then gradually increasing based on how you feel.
Okay.
And this is important, the text flags this as an unverified protocol
Yeah.
and really strongly advises seeking proper medical advice before following anything like this.
Okay, I think that's really important
Yeah.
to highlight. We have to always be cautious about
Yes.
relying on solid scientific evidence
Yes.
and the guidance of, qualified healthcare professionals.
Yes.
While individual ideas and reports can be interesting, it's crucial to base, health decisions on established research.
Yeah.
So that unverified label, I think, is a big red flag
Huge red flag.
in this case.
So the big question, do nicotine patches actually work for weight loss?
Right.
The sources say that yes, there's some evidence showing short-term reductions in body weight,
Okay.
help with controlling food cravings,
Okay.
and even a boost in fat oxidation,
It's fat oxidation.
which is basically your body breaking down and using fat for energy.
Got it.
However, there's a word of caution about long-term use with potential for dependence and those side effects we mentioned.
So it seems like there's a distinction there
Yeah.
between those initial effects you might see. Yeah.
And whether it's something you can sustain over a long period of time.
Right.
So, nicotine might kickstart some changes,
Yeah.
but your body can adapt to it. And the risks of long-term use
Yeah.
become more significant.
Yeah. So the material gives us a quick comparison between nicotine gum
Okay.
and patches for weight loss.
Right.
So patches provide this steady release over a longer duration, like 16 to 24 hours,
Okay.
and they're seen as better for overall appetite control, whereas gum offers quicker absorption
Okay.
over a shorter period, like 20 to 30 minutes,
Right.
and might be better for tackling those immediate cravings.
Okay.
Patches are also highlighted as more convenient
Yeah.
since they're like hands-free,
Well, stick it on or forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. Unlike chewing gum.
Yeah. So this comparison gives you an idea of the different delivery methods
Yeah,
for nicotine and how that might affect your body.
right.
So the steady release from the patch makes sense for trying to control appetite consistently.
Whereas the gum might be more useful for,
Yeah.
those sudden cravings that pop up.
All right. Now digging a little deeper into how nicotine might actually affect fat loss.
Okay.
The sources touch on some recent research.
Right.
This includes the idea that nicotine could activate brown fat,
Brown fat.
which is different from white fat, which stores energy.
Right.
Brown fat actually burns calories to generate heat.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there's also a mention that it might increase lipolysis,
Lipolysis.
which is the process where stored fat in your body is broken down
Okay.
into fatty acids that can then be used for energy.
Got it.
And the sources also suggest it might reduce inflammation,
Okay.
which has been linked to obesity.
Interesting.
Yeah. But they're careful to point out that more research is needed to really understand these long-term benefits.
So this is connecting to the broader field of, metabolic research.
Yeah.
These are really interesting areas that are being investigated.
Yeah.
Brown fat activation and lipolysis are both, pathways that help your body burn more energy,
Yeah.
reduce fat stores. So it'll be really interesting to see,
Yeah.
how reliably and safely
Yeah.
nicotine can influence these things in humans over the long term.
Right. And to give you a really clear picture, the sources lay out some pros and cons
Okay.
of using nicotine patches for weight loss.
Okay.
So on the plus side, there's the potential for appetite suppression, increased metabolism,
Okay.
and the fact that you're getting nicotine without all those harmful toxins from smoking.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, there are some serious downsides, including the risk of addiction,
Right.
those potential side effects like nausea and dizziness,
Yeah.
and the really important point that nicotine patches are not actually FDA approved
Right.
for weight loss.
Yeah, I think this kind of balanced view is so important.
Yes.
While those potential benefits might sound appealing, there are risks involved.
Right.
And the fact that, this isn't an approved use are really significant things that people have to weigh.
Right.
The risk of addiction, in particular, is not something to take lightly.
Yeah, adding another layer, one of the sources mentions a 2023 study that looked at nicotine's impact on cognitive function.
Okay.
And while it suggested potential improvements in some areas,
Okay.
it also raised a flag about excessive use,
Uh-oh.
potentially impairing memory.
Okay.
So it's like,
Yeah.
we still have a lot to learn.
It's a complex picture.
It's so complex.
Yeah. It's amazing how much we're still learning about the effects of nicotine on the body. And, it's not just about weight. It can have these wide-ranging effects on your nervous system.
Yeah.
And we're still figuring out, what the optimal doses are
Right.
and what the long-term effects on things like memory might be.
Yeah. And speaking of those side effects,
Yeah.
the sources list some common ones to be aware of.
Okay.
Skin irritation at the patch site,
Mm-hmm.
headaches,
Okay.
insomnia,
Yeah.
and increased heart rate.
Makes sense.
The advice is clear.
Yeah.
If you experience any severe reactions, stop using the patch immediately.
Yeah, stop right away. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You have to pay attention to your body if you were
Sure.
to try something like this. And, side effects can range from minor annoyances
Yeah.
to, more serious health issues.
Yeah.
So caution is definitely needed.
So in terms of how much weight you might expect to lose,
Yeah.
the sources offer some estimates.
Okay.
So in the short term with diet and exercise, some people might see 2 to 5 pounds of loss per month.
Okay.
But it's noted that these results tend to diminish over the long term as your body gets used to the nicotine.
Right. So this is kind of getting at the idea of tolerance.
Right.
Your body adapts to the presence of nicotine,
Mm-hmm.
and that can make it less effective over time.
Yeah.
And this also kind of explains why this is not seen as a, sustainable long-term solution for weight loss.
Yet the underlying message seems to be that while nicotine can potentially help you lose weight, it's definitely not a magic bullet.
No silver bullets in weight loss,
Not at all.
unfortunately.
Yeah, it really emphasizes that it's most effective when used in conjunction with a calorie-controlled diet,
Right.
regular exercise,
Yeah.
and just making changes to your overall habits.
Absolutely. And, if we tie this back to those kind of core principles of weight management,
Yeah.
losing weight in a healthy and sustainable way relies on, lifestyle changes that affect how many calories you take in
Yeah.
and how many you burn off.
Right.
So nicotine, at best, it looks like it could be something that helps alongside those core elements,
Right.
but not something that replaces them.
Exactly. And the material even includes some anecdotal reports of what people have experienced,
Okay.
like reduced snacking,
Okay.
better portion control,
Mm-hmm.
and some mild fat loss.
Yeah.
But it's stressed that individual results can really vary.
Right. And it's important to be careful about anecdotes.
While personal experiences can be interesting
Yeah.
and, kind of give you an idea of what's possible,
Yeah.
they don't take the place of well-designed scientific studies
Right.
that can control for other factors and involve larger numbers of people.
Right. So interestingly, the sources also touch on potential health benefits of nicotine beyond weight loss,
Okay.
including possible cognitive support for Parkinson's disease,
Wow.
anti-inflammatory effects for ulcerative colitis, and focus improvement for ADHD.
Wow. So it's like
So many things.
a wonder drug almost
Yeah.
for everything. But of course,
So you have to be cautious.
super cautious.
Yeah.
The big disclaimer is to always consult a doctor before considering nicotine for any medical condition.
Absolutely. And I think, it just highlights how complex nicotine is.
Yeah.
It's, how it can interact with so many different systems in the body.
Yeah.
But the fact that these are mentioned as potential benefits
Yeah.
means, we need a lot more research. And, medical supervision is absolutely required.
Yeah.
Using any substance off-label like this
Yeah.
always carries risks.
And circling back to metabolism,
Okay.
the sources confirm that nicotine does seem to increase it
Okay.
by stimulating adrenaline and activating that brown fat.
Right.
But they note that these effects are generally modest.
So you might see a slight increase in metabolism,
Yeah.
but probably not significant enough on its own
Right.
to cause, major weight loss.
Right.
without also making changes to diet and exercise.
Yeah, and there's even a mention of some early studies suggesting nicotine might play a role in reducing the severity of COVID-19
Oh, wow.
by potentially blocking viral entry.
Okay.
But the sources are very clear.
Yeah.
This is not proven.
Right.
And you should definitely not use nicotine as a treatment for COVID.
Absolutely. And I think it's just so critical for people to understand that, you know,
Yeah.
early unconfirmed findings should never be taken as established medical advice.
Right.
Especially when it comes to, you know, treating serious infectious diseases.
Yeah. For those wondering about the right dose for weight loss, the sources provide some general guidelines based on your smoking history.
Okay.
So 7 milligrams for light users,
Okay.
14 for moderate,
Mm-hmm.
and 21 for heavy.
Got it.
But the overarching advice is still to start with a lower dose to minimize those potential side effects.
Right. And I think it's important to emphasize that even though these dosage suggestions are based on previous nicotine use, you know, they should still be approached very cautiously,
Yeah.
especially if someone has never used nicotine before.
Yeah.
Starting with the lowest dose that might be effective is always the safest way to go.
Yeah, the concept of nicotine replacement therapy, or NRT, is also introduced. And this includes patches, gum, lozenges, and inhalers.
Right.
These are primarily used to help people quit smoking,
Right.
but are sometimes considered off-label for weight loss. Yeah, so it's kind of putting those patches into this bigger category of products that are designed to deliver nicotine without, you know, all the really bad parts of smoking.
Right. Without the combustion and the tar and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're being looked at for a different use, you know, really shows how we're still learning
Yeah, we're still figuring it out.
about all the effects that nicotine can have.
Absolutely.
And finally, the sources address a very common question.
Okay.
Why do nicotine patches sometimes cause itching? And the answer points to both the adhesive and the nicotine itself,
Okay.
potentially irritating the skin.
So it's kind of a double whammy.
Yeah, potentially. So some suggested solutions include rotating, where you apply the patch,
Okay.
using hydrocortisone cream,
Okay.
or even trying a different brand of patch.
Yeah, and I think those are really practical tips for managing a common problem.
Yeah.
Skin irritation can be a big reason why people, you know, might stop using the patch. Right. So finding ways to deal with that is important.
Yeah, so to wrap up this deep dive into nicotine patches and weight loss,
Right.
the information you shared suggests that they might offer some short-term help
Okay.
by suppressing appetite and giving your metabolism a little nudge.
Okay.
But it's really important to remember the potential risks,
Right.
including addiction and those side effects we discussed.
Yeah.
And the sources are pretty clear that nicotine patches are not a long-term magic solution for weight loss.
Right.
And shouldn't replace a healthy lifestyle
Yeah.
built on good nutrition and regular exercise.
Couldn't agree more.
So the final verdict from the sources seems to be
Yeah.
possibly a short-term aid,
Yeah.
but definitely not a long-term fix.
Right. And I think that the consistent and strong recommendation across all the material is to always, you know, consult with healthcare professionals.
Yes.
Before even considering using nicotine patches for weight loss.
100%. And this brings up a really important question for you to consider. Given the potential benefits and the known risks, and especially the lack of long-term data and FDA approval for this specific use,
Right.
what are your thoughts on this information?
Yeah. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really highlights how a substance primarily known for one purpose can have these like surprising and potentially complex effects on other aspects of our health.
Yeah. You never know what you're going to find when you start digging into this stuff.
Right, exactly. And hopefully this deep dive has sparked some further questions for you to explore with your doctor.
Absolutely. Always a good idea.
Thanks for bringing this fascinating topic to the table.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for joining me.
Of course, my pleasure.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
All right, see you then.
Bye.